Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts as they share with you the insider's guide to property investing.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, your insider's guide to property investing. I'm Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel. And he's Ben Kingsley, the chair of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisor of the Year. That sounds good, doesn't it, mate?
Yeah, it's a nice ring to it.
It does have a nice ring to it. Mate, we're into our summer series. It's always nice to be in Melbourne when it's summer. You still don't know if it's summer or winter.
34 one day, 16 next. That's Melbourne weather for you.
So a shout out to all our Queensland listeners. We are very, very jealous of you. But today we thought we would talk about... well, first of all, I should ask how you going, mate. How are you?
Good. Yeah, no, well, yes. Been overseas at a conference and come back and just in time for the recording of this show.
Exactly. You did a 36-hour commute. That's always good.
Yeah, I missed my connection out of Los Angeles, so I had to go via Sydney on home. That's always fun. Adds another 4 hours to a very long commute.
Don't feel bad for him, listeners. He's been travelling around the Caribbean on a cruise boat. So
conference, Bryce.
It was a
conference. Work job.
It was a course, wasn't
Absolute work job.
18 holes?
No, well, not on the cruise ship. On the island.
It was all putt. So good to have you back, mate. Always good to have you back. We have we've been asked a couple of times with the Money Magazine to do some case studies around how to create 1,000 a week, 2,000 a week, whatever it is. We've just written our book, which has got case studies around 2,000 a week. So we thought today we might give our listeners a bit of a heads up on some of the variables that go into making a plan, because there's a lot.
There is. I mean, and as you get more advanced, so for those who are relating to having multiple properties, you want to start sort of modelling out what it all means, because you'll get to a stage, and I know this personally, in terms of when I was probably 15 years ago, I'm sitting back going, how many more do I need? About to get married, want to start a family, starting to plan out some of that future stuff, which is really hard to do. But once you actually get a portfolio built, there's this challenge of, okay, well, how easy is to model? So what we were going to do, and we've included this in our book, which is really cool, is to talk about some of these wealth accumulation concepts and these moving parts. And then once we can get those moving parts out there, we can start to let those people who want to take it seriously really understand what we're all about.
Agreed. We travel around the country doing a talk on how to create a passive income. It's kind of our keynote talk, and this particular slide comes up in my section.
Yep.
And I always sort of check the audience to see if they're falling asleep, because we put that many bullet points up on the slide that if someone gets past the third bullet, they're doing really well. But I think that's the point, isn't it? That building a plan is actually... You always use the BHP doesn't do a mine without a full FISO.
Yeah.
When you're trying to plan call it a $2,000 per week retirement income, there's a fair few moving parts to go into it, but quite often people can't get a hand on that, can they?
No, they can't, or they make mistakes, which are costly to reverse out. So, the biggest mistake people can make is jumping into a property and in 2 or 3 years running out of cash flow because they've gone down to one income, and then they have to sell that investment property. So it's almost like they've speculated on it, and in reality, it might have gone up a little bit, but when they factor in the interest that they've paid and the acquisition costs such as stamp duty, they're actually out of pocket. And so if this is this is for the novices, this is about trying to understand it, plan it correctly, and we've got all these checkpoints and bullet points that we can talk through, and that's the beauty of a podcast. We can actually unpack it in a bit more detail.
We certainly can. Now we're going to put some details up on the propertycouch.com.au to show you a diagram that we'll be referencing to today. But mate, where should we kick it off? There's really 3 categories of expenses, variables that we need to consider. So let's kick it off.
Yeah, so the first one is the now variable. So, in terms of these moving parts, what we're talking about here, and we're getting into some detail, so we're talking about current salary and wages, any other income that you may be enjoying, and that could be family benefits. Then current tax rates are always going to be important to understand. Current spending levels, so what's money coming in, the money going out. Then you've got your bill payments, so those regular commitments that you'll never pay more on your phone bill, and I think you've mentioned that before, Bryce. And then we've got basically value, the value of your home, current savings, superannuation balance. So as you can see, I'm reading through this list, so it's best to download off the website this full list, so you don't have to be writing these down. We're going to provide this whole fact sheet to you as a freebie, and then we get into it.
Can I jump in there, Ben, and say that one of the ones you said there was the current spending levels? It'd be fair to say that's the hardest for people to get a handle on, isn't it? Because how much do you actually spend on discretionary spending each year? That's the question to the listeners. They're driving or listening to this podcast at the moment. How much do you spend? Because it's you know how much you spend on your fixed costs, your power bill, your rates, your mobile phone. But it's just how much do you spend on your lattes and your red wine and your fillet steak each week. That's the tough one.
Yeah, look, and there's also a bit of a dissection in your spending in terms of your committed spending, which is what we call, you still have to clothe yourself, you have to put food in the system to keep running your body, but there's certain types of food you can put in. You can put in very expensive food, or you can put in basic food. Same with clothing. You can have a cheap handbag or a very expensive handbag. You can have a very cheap golf driver, or you can have a very expensive golf driver. So, balancing the conversation out a bit. That's the sort of stuff. So you need to understand that from a discretionary point of view, there's still absolutely, we need to keep shelter, we need to keep basic food, basic clothing, but then it's the layer that you put on that. And then that's the discretionary stuff in terms of how much you then want to spend on entertainment, going out, hobbies and interests, lotto tickets, gambling, alcohol, all those types of things are part of the assessment that you want to do in the now, and then how that looks moving forward.
One of our business partners, Michael Pope, is a genius at a whole bunch of things. But I remember when I first met him a few years back, he goes, budgets just don't work. And I went, well, what do you mean? Budgets just don't work. And he says, in isolation, they just don't work. And he's got a really good point, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of dialogue that creates for our listeners, because ultimately it's a reflection. On the first of the month, you say, this is how much I've got, this is how much I should have left, and then we've got call it $1,000 surplus, whatever it is at the end of the month. And then they get to the end of the month, they got $20 surplus, and they go, well, something went wrong there. But as you always say, they always think, well, I'm still in the black, so I've had a win.
Yep.
But most people find they have too much month left at the end of the money. And
say that again. It's a very good point. I love
it's got to land. It's got to land.
It's going to land.
Too much month left at the end of the money. And I think so. I now get what he meant by budgets don't work alone. Because you've got to have a budget so you know how much you're allowing, but then you've got to have a money management system around that. And in terms of what we do with our clients, we give them, it's in the book, it's called the Money Smart System, and essentially that gives people a framework on how to manage their money. Now, it doesn't matter how much you spend each week. You could spend $3,000 a week, you could spend $300 a week, but once you know what that number is, if you implement these very simple steps, you won't unconsciously overspend again.
Yep.
My wife and I do it. I know you do it.
Yep.
We consciously overspend at times, but we never unconsciously overspend. Yep. And I think that's the real key, because most of the discretionary spend and the slippage and the reason why people don't achieve what they want is that unconscious overspend.
Yeah, they do. And so what they're doing is they're effectively saying, okay, we want to spend $600 a week on the family budget, $200 on groceries, but they get to, sort of maybe day 5 in the week and they're like, oh, there's nothing in the pantry, I'll just quickly go down and do another shop. That's the stuff that, open the pantry, open the fridge, there's probably a meal in there. There's probably 2 or 3 meals in there. But what we do is we just, hit the ATM, we'll go and grab some more cash, or we'll go and pay it on card or whatever. That's the slippage. That's the stuff that turns out to be $100 a month, $200 a month, maybe even in some cases $300. Now that $300 a month can control an investment property, and that's the message we have here. It's not so much, I got caught up in buying a new LED TV and we got the latest and greatest. People still do that, and if they're putting it on credit cards, well, they're just dumb, because obviously that's not their money. A lot of people spend their money in advance, and look, the people we're talking to and the people listening are really not those types of credit poor people. They might have a moment in time where they did bottom out, and they're just thinking, this is crazy, I need to make a change in my life, and this is where the real changes happen. And then we start thinking about it. I remember, Michael again sort of saying the same thing. When you do a budget, it's like driving looking in the rear vision mirror, because effectively what you're doing is you've got a simple spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet you're just sort of saying, okay, this is what I'm spending, and then you sort of have a savings number at the bottom. Now that savings number looks good if you're sort of banking it every month. Well done, everyone, if you are, or every week. But then it's like, okay, well, I want to start a family. And I want to, so we might go down to one income, and then we're going to have ongoing costs for our child indefinitely, or until we kick them out when they're 18, 21, 25. It's that type of stuff that this podcast's all about.
Yeah, and if our listeners are wondering why we're focusing so much on the minutiae of the detail, it's because ultimately, the analogy that I think about is if you've got a bath, you've got two ways to keep the water in the bath. You can put the plug in, or you can leave the plug out and keep putting more water in the top. And really what we're talking about here is putting the plug in.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to continually be filling over the top. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is pay off the principal place of residence and buy somewhere between 3 and 5 investment properties, have smart debt structure around it. Once you finish your accumulation phase, you sit pretty in the retirement phase.
Oh, mate, that's a great analogy. And I think we should also put on the website, just thinking about it, that Two Men and a Boy, is that what's that comedy called?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we'll get that link up.
Yes.
Where Charlie goes in to see his accountant, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's absolute gold.
You're right. It's 2.5 men, and for all the women, we're sorry it's an absolutely misogynistic program.
Yes.
But we're going to put up this YouTube clip on the Property Couch. You've got to see it.
Yeah.
About hemorrhage of cash. So it's brilliant. It's comical.
Yeah. And look, I mean, obviously, you know our ABCD. It's basically cash flow and borrowing. That's really important because, quite frankly, you wouldn't necessarily go into property investing unless you could have a leveraged position. I mean, you might be better off in other alternative investments, because the power of property is one around control, safety, bricks and mortar in terms of low volatility, but then ultimately it's about controlling a bigger value that eventually starts to provide that passive income. So, that's what this message is all about.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess there's a question that's come through during the week from Braden Mitchell. I actually know Braden. He's a Perth boy. He knows my sister. He's bought our book. He put a little note on social media yesterday that he's got the book and he hopes it doesn't disappoint. Braden,
we hope it doesn't disappoint.
We hope it doesn't disappoint as well. But here goes, mate. Just love listening to the podcast. I started from episode 1 and I'm now up to date. A little sad though now having to wait a week for the next episode, but it's something to look forward to during my busy week. My question is, you often refer to paying down debt during your talks as a means of creating passive income. Is there a strategy of paying down debt on your rental properties? Is it just as simple as paying P&I? Do you only start paying down debt once you have finished your accumulation phase? Does this only happen when you start to sell one of your properties? I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on paying down debt. And I probably should have started with this, Ivis, because he goes, P.S. Ben's not a bad bloke for a Collingwood supporter.
Yes.
So, Brad and I wouldn't go that far, mate, but thanks for...
Still got my front teeth. Absolutely. No ink on the body.
Exactly. Yeah, true. So there's a few sub-questions there, Ben. Where do you want to kick that one off?
Well, I think it's a really good session, and we're now getting a little bit technical. So in our business, when we're doing cash flow models, we measure cash flow movements every month for the next 40 to 50 years. And that obviously allows me, and this is probably why I'm so successful at, in terms of what I do, is because it allows me to understand where the next opportunity is to buy the next property at the next price point, and then what types of returns we're trying to chase. And that's well documented in other parts of the book. Now, that being said, what we do is we have, if you can imagine, visualize this, guys, 2 buckets. And the first bucket is the debt bucket, and then the second bucket is where the surplus cash is going into. So that's the money that we're generating, and that's an offset account, okay? So how we do it is, once each bucket's full against each debt level, that's basically what's happening. And so we're always, with our clients, in a strong liquidity position, because if something does go wrong, bang, redundancy, lost job, economic downturn, we buy time. And time is critical. So great examples are the collapse of ABC learning centres. They are very highly geared, and the banks didn't give them any time. They basically said, bang, you need to service this debt. You can't do it. We're calling in the debt, and they didn't have liquidity to do that. So what we do with our clients is an absolute minimum. We want 6 months liquidity. So rather than paying it off, we actually have interest-only loans and we build them up. Now, to answer the second part of that question, what's happening over time is that we are able to increase our rents. so we can put the rent up 3-5% a year, and then ultimately at some point the value of the property is growing as well, and we're starting to see that income and the rental income continuing to grow. So over time, if it's negatively geared as a property to start with, which means that we're kicking in to control and maintain the property, at some point into the future that turns to neutral and then ultimately positively geared. And that's how it happens. So once all the buckets are full, the client can choose to then effectively just pay out all the loans and then live off that passive rent roll. Or in some cases, by the time they wanted to retire, there still might be a residual debt left, and the client's going to have a choice to sort of still play it out. In other words, take a bit of that money out of the offset each time. So as they're travelling on their journey of retirement, they can clip away a bit of that liquidity that they're controlling, and the properties are still growing in value and they're still potentially increasing their rent. Or they can do a sell down of one property, retire a bit of debt and be left with the others.
There you go, Brad. There's some gold there. I never get sick of hearing that. I always think of, first of all, you're not going to hear that advice you just heard then in mainstream because the bank don't really want you to do that. So effectively, I always think about, the Google worm every night is running around the web and it's looking for websites that it's never seen before, and it's just, this worm that's moving around. I think that's kind of the analogy for what we're looking for within your portfolio. It's like a little worm looking for the most expensive debt that you have. And typically it's your credit card debt or your store cards.
Yep.
First of all, pay that off. And then
Brilliant.
the next most expensive debt that the worm needs to go to is your principal place of residence debt, because you're the only person that's paying that off. And then once you've done that, Brad, because that's your next question, is it just as simple as paying P&I, and how do you do it? Two parts to that. One is always be looking for the most expensive debt you have in your portfolio. Put your offset account against that debt so that you can be building up the buckets, as Ben said. And ultimately, over time, the goal is to have just buckets full of cash represented by your offset account. Is it as simple as paying P&I? Interestingly, most of our clients end up getting interest only across their whole portfolio, including their principal place of residence, because they're adopting this very strategy that we're talking about now. So you're effectively doing the same thing as you'd be doing if you're paying principal and interest, only you're still controlling your cash, as Ben said, or controlling your liquidity. So ultimately, it's about taking advice from people who are looking for optimal structure rather than necessarily taking advice from the bank.
Mate, well said. And if I could add a little bit to that, part of the other little trick, and I don't like to use the word trick because this is fundamental stuff, but it's basically the other bit of magic, I suppose, is you consolidate personal loans and you consolidate credit card loans, car loans, into your cheapest form of debt. So that's consolidating it into the mortgage, of which you just said you put your offset account against. So in some cases, just with that consolidation, and for the smart mathematicians out there and engineers and people who love money management, they would know that, but what you're doing is basically extending the debt period. And we're saying, yes, you are, but the science of that is, on the flip side, is if you're controlling an asset that's growing at a quicker value. So I'll unpack this very quickly. Here we are. Let's say we've got $15,000 in personal debts and credit card debts, and the cost of that money is, say, $800 a month. By refinancing that into the home loan, that might bring that repayment commitment down to $350 a month. So all of a sudden, you've got $450
Beautiful.
in surplus cash a month. There's an investment property if you've got equity.
Yep.
So that's the message. And then they sort of saying, well, we get it. It's sort of like, okay, well, or do I wait? Because what a lot of people might do is say, look, I've got a $10,000 credit card debt and I've got this $15,000 car loan. So once I clear that debt, i.e. 4 years later, I'm going to be in a position to start looking to invest. We're saying, look, property is a long-term investment. The longer you hold it, the better the compounding growth return you're going to get. That's where the gold lives. So that is the science or the magic around doing sophisticated money modelling, because when you do that money modelling, you actually can see the true wealth potential in which you're able to create. So really important thing.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Because in the book we talk about money smarts, which is the way that you should potentially look to structure your lending for optimal results. And it's incredibly simple. It's no rocket science, but the amount of times I've seen clients show me how they money here. There's an account for the kids' savings, and it should all be allocated, but it should all be in your most expensive debt. So if we have a look at the part here where you say Do you only start paying down debt once you have finished your accumulation phase? The answer is no. You start paying down your debt as soon as the portfolio suggests that you've now paid off all of your expensive debt. You paid off, as Ben said, you've refinanced all your store cars and your credit cards, then you focus on your principal place of residence. If you've paid off your principal place of residence or you've filled up the bucket during your accumulation phase, bang, straight away start to move the focus and look for the most expensive debt you've got.
So we start with non-deductible debt. So that's the owner-occupied debt. So that's the debt we'll always focus on paying off first, and then we'll go to deductible debt. So when we're going into the business of property, that interest is obviously tax deductible. So we're trying to make sure we pay down the principal debt first and then get into paying down that over time. So there's some really good stuff in there, which again brings us back to the model. If you've downloaded that fact sheet, we'll start talking about the other two components of that. So what are they, Bros?
Yeah, so you started talking about now variables and you went through some expenses, some super assets. It's kind of a bit of balance sheet and what you're paying on your investment properties. The second one, the second column is effectively future variables. So what's going to happen in the future to salary and wages? You touched on it before. Quite often people don't really know how to plan for maternity leave, for example, where income's going to drop. So it's about knowing that. Future spending levels. And by that, what phase of life are you in? Your kids are going to go through childcare, they're going to go through primary school, they're going to go through tertiary education, so planning for those things. And then also thinking about, super contributions, what you think interest rates will do. We're very conservative in our business. Interest rates are, historically low, but we still factor them in at 7.25.
We do, and it's really important for people to understand that. I mean, too many people get caught in the trap to say, we can afford it now. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast. So some of the assumptions that you need to make need to be real assumptions. I mean, because anyone can build a model. Anyone can build a model and make it look like it's going to work by putting artificial assumptions in there. So the one we've used is 7.25% long-term interest rate. So at the moment, your money's, you're paying retail around sort of 4.5%. So everyone sort of thinks, well, wow, look at all this surplus cash I've got. But when you start factoring it at 7.25% long term, it's like, I really can afford this and I will be able to hold this for the long term.
It's pretty easy for you to try and resist that, isn't it? No, it's not easy. It's tempting for you to go, well, interest rates are low, I should bang them in. But you've stayed true to your word and you've kept it at 7.25 and you don't put depreciation in. So there's a bit of upside cream. There's
definitely some conservative numbers, and sometimes, we do in the investment committee that we have, Michael, myself and the property advisory team, we basically are testing that on a regular basis to just make sure that it is relative, because we may be in a low interest rate environment for the next 20 years. And so we may have, and so if our assumptions are wrong, and let's say long-term interest rates are around 6.5%, well, effectively that would mean the debt would retire quicker than what we have in the models that we build. Yep.
So there you go. So the now variables, the future variables, and then the third category is our expected one-offs. Largely around, what's your bucket list? You've got the minutiae of life, money in, money out, keeping the household running. But what about the things that you want to do? Upgrade your car every 10 years. You want to go on a significant holiday. You want to take the kids to Disneyland. You want to renovate the kitchen. Whatever it is that you want to do, we need to be able to allow for those too, Ben.
Yeah, they do. And what you need to think about income-wise, it's pretty predictable. So in other words, what type of income can you see? Now, your qualifications might rise. You may be a GP and you're going through your years and you're accelerated. So we use 3% income growth per annum when we're indexing. But obviously some people know that there's certain jobs. Teachers are another great example. When they get certain levels, they jump up to the next pay scale. So that's important to understand. So you've got the regular and then the one-offs. Now the one-off income can sometimes be an inheritance, a gift from family, those types of things. On the expenditure side, and this is where I want to spend a quick minute, and that is around sort of saying that you have one-off expenditures, which might be, okay, well, in 10 years' time, it's very clear that we'll need to renovate our bathroom. So I'm going to allocate $15,000 for a renovation of the bathroom, and then the ongoing ones are the ones like, I've got a child, I need to put them through school, and so that's going to last for 6 or 7 years at a private school fee or at a public school rate or a Catholic school rate, whatever it may be. once you're sort of factoring those in, you're starting to build a very, very powerful model. And knowledge is power. So it's really important that if you can understand your cash flows, you are halfway home. Then it comes down to those, because then we've solved the cash flow, we've solved the C and the B, the borrowing, we've solved that in this model. So then it's the asset selection, the A, and then the D, the defence, making sure that when you're doing this, you're also factoring in some of those protection mechanisms.
And then Ben, overlaying the filters of all these things that we're talking about with red light, orange light, green light, in terms, and just the basic symbolism is, am I on track?
Yeah.
Do I need to tweak a bit, or am I just totally in the red and something's gone wrong? So
correct.
That constant monitoring.
Yeah, because again, here's where the budget fails, that revision. That's a fixed number in time. So when you do a true budget, it needs to be a weekly or monthly, and we use monthly because weekly is just very difficult. But if you use monthly, you're sort of saying, well, if you build out a spreadsheet, you can actually put, if you have a nice big large expenditure category, you can actually put when those numbers are going to be in there, and you can say, oh, well, this is what's going to happen to our income. This is what's going to happen. So you don't have to be as sophisticated as what we are in it. And in all honesty, to build this out took around 18 months. It's a very sophisticated model, and we did it because there was nothing available in the marketplace that was property portfolio specific. There's definitely off-the-shelf stuff you can buy that's individual property assessments, but in terms of doing it, and that's probably why we've been so successful.
So there you go, Braden. Very timely question on what we wanted to talk about today. So you've asked, is it just as simple as paying down P&I? No, we'd still recommend interest only with offset accounts. Do you only start paying down debt once you finish your accumulation phase? No, as soon as it's practically possible. Does this only happen when you start to sell one of your properties? Depends on, there's no vanilla solution here. Some people do need to sell down, but generally speaking, the nirvana for us is to be able to hold them long term with the debt structure in place so that you can retire all the debt and hold them and pass it on to your heirs. But in some cases, depending on your circumstances and when you start, you may need to sell. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on paying down debt. So hopefully that's helped.
Yeah, it's an eyes wide open approach, everyone. I do use that analogy of if BHP are going to spend $500 million on a mine, they're not going to go in there with, finger in the air sort of saying, I'll test the breeze or my gut tells me this is a good deal. They will do multiple scenarios and they'll make a decision that presentation will occur at board level. Because obviously it's about shareholder return. No different than a household. You are the general managers of your money, and if you get that right, you'll ultimately be in a successful position down the track.
Very, very well said. Very well said. All right, so there you have it, folks. We spent a lot of time today talking about the minutiae of money flow, but it's really, really important for building a passive income. So I think anyone who's a loyal listener would know that our book has now hit the bookstores. Within that book is the Money Smart system. So to help, we understand and we get that money management is tough, largely because there's some psychology behind it as well, just not the logistics.
Big psychology.
So if you want to get your hands on a copy of that, we'll talk about Money Smarts in a future podcast. But if you're thinking that this is something that you might want to sort of touch on over your Christmas break whilst you're having a bit of downtime, it really is worthwhile. I know it sounds like a book plug here, but it's well worth the effort to go through that. I implement the Money Smarts in my own life. I know Ben implements the Money Smarts in his own life, so hopefully that can help you simplify. And it doesn't matter if you're a pauper or a rich man, the same principles apply. Hey, we've hit a really significant milestone, Ben.
Do tell.
Mate, 100,000 downloads.
Whoa!
Can you believe it? 100,000 downloads in 41 episodes. Actually, in 40 episodes, because 41st today.
Yep.
So a huge shout out and thanks to our loyal listeners. We do get some great feedback from people. We're glad that it's helping. We haven't held anything back. Our goal is just to give back. So obviously we've hit the right chord there. So thank you to all our listeners. We always ask a favour. Simply, if you're enjoying it, can you just tell one person? We're happy for you to tell 10, but if you just tell one person, that'd be really great so we can grow the message and get it out there.
You know what I love about it? Is that there are a lot of other people passionate about property like we are. We had someone reach out to us who was in their early 20s, and I thought that's just nice because that was me some 20 odd years ago. So it's really nice that people are doing that, and some people are obviously reaching out to our business to sort of see if there's any opportunities, and we welcome that. At the end of the day, we want to help as many people as we possibly can And so that's what this podcast is about. But those people who want to follow their passion and have a career like we've done in something we love is just really nice.
Yeah, well, I agree. We love to hear from those people. So yeah, 100,000, we're particularly stoked about that. For those of you that love social media, I tell you every week that there's an opportunity to go and join our social media community. What Ivis is going to do today is she's going to put a Facebook post up that says, what topics do you want to hear in 2016? We know that you're sending in your specific Q&As, but if you want a headline level on some topics to make sure that we cover in 2016, there's an opportunity. We know it's pretty easy to get onto your social media on your phones. Just respond to that, put a little note in the comments section, and Ivis will make a note of that, and we'll cover that in 2016. Anything else, Ben?
Well, just on the turnover, let's see if we can get to 200,000 by July.
I'm going to sit down for
There
this.
we go.
I suppose
Always like to just push it out there. The more people who know, the better they'll be. That's the truth. And there's no, we don't sell anything. Maybe a book.
A book,
Let's be
we're
honest,
probably
book.
accused of
But
playing
the reality is this is all about knowledge.
Yep.
And knowledge empowering if you act on it. So I'm a big believer in that sort of component.
Well, as we sign off, we had a client recently, nothing to do with us, had a $425,000 purchase revalued at $125,000. So that's and I think under the models it'll take 30 years under the current growth rate to get back to ground zero. So that is why this podcast exists, so that you don't buy a property for $425,000 that gets revalued at $125,000.
Very true. And if I could just reach out on one last message, our business is expanding. So as I was saying before, it's great to see other people out there who are passionate about property. Inside our property planning area, we do have a role for a customer support person. So if you love numbers and you love property,
You're good at Excel,
and you like a bit of Excel, then this is the perfect job for you, and sort of good customer service type role, in the business. So that's so reach out to us via the Property Couch website.
Send an email to Ivis, info@thepropertycouch.com.au, and that'll definitely get through to Ben. All right, folks, there you go. We sent out a little note last week about whether Ben should sign off Ivis every week around the world. And
Hey, come on. More no's, please.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. There was more yeses.
So we're not. Yeah. Well, come on, those people, vote no.
You've created a monster.
Vote no.
So there you go, folks. Until you tell us on social media no, the yeses have won. So looks like we'll be signing off. Where are we going today, mate?
We're going to our neighbours, probably our number one tourist destination, which is Indonesia.
Oh, yes.
So, there'll be plenty of people going over to Bali for Christmas. So we're going to have
you with my family.
Indonesian.
Here we go.
So, Selamat Tinggal. Selamat Tinggal. Tinggal.
Yeah.
Tinggal.
Yeah.
Selamat.
I've just given you the slight sort of hand wave.
So that's 50-50.
So there you go. So until next week, folks, in Indonesian.
When leaving, Selamat Tinggal.
Selamat tinggal. See you, folks. See you next week.